Aisling magazine is sitting with Aisling McCarthy, an equestrian rider at Glover Paddocks Equestrian Park in Joburg. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start off with, how did you get involved in a sport like this?
Well, I grew up with horses. My mom and my grandfather were both big into horses, so I grew up on a plot with them. And my mom sort of put me onto a horse and made me ride, and I loved it. So I've been doing it ever since.
Now you compete in 4 different events, namely dressage, show jumping, eventing, and showing.
That's correct.
For the viewers that do not necessarily know the difference, would you mind to briefly just explain what they are?
Sure. Show jumping is probably the most common one. It's pretty much just jumping over jumps. Eventing is sort of similar, but the jumps are solid, so it gets a bit more dangerous. Dressage is sort of, it's riding your horse to do specific movements. So it's sort of like, looks like the horses are dancing. And showing is about the way your horse is conformed. So it's their body and the way that you have schooled them to move and to work. They're supposed to work correctly.
Now you have 2 horses that you use competitively, Kibal and Ivy League. Now with animals, I mean, obviously with this sort of sport, you are dealing with something that you have no control over. How do you train them, and what does your training entail?
Well, it kind of involves 6 days a week of riding and practicing and training to get them where you want them to be. And obviously some days they're wonderful, other days not so wonderful. And you kind of have to read the animals. You know, obviously being in a sport that doesn't have equipment, it has another living being. You have to kind of see how they feel and work around what they want and how they feel to try and get it together.
Let's talk about your role models. Who do you look up to in the sport?
A lot of the really big South African riders are incredible. You look at people like Barry Taylor and Lorette Knowles-Taylor, who have been riding since they were, juniors and children, and they're incredible now. They're right at the top of the sport, and they manage to have full-time jobs as all the top riders do and get it together with a lot of horses.
There's no doubt about it that horses can be dangerous animals. We've read a lot about people falling off horses, injuring themselves quite severely. Have you sustained any injuries?
The worst injury I've ever had was actually getting on one of my horses. I was getting on and a gazebo fell over nearby to us, and my horse freaked out and took off, and I had one foot caught in the stirrup, and he actually kicked me, and I ended up cutting my liver into half, and I was in hospital for quite a few weeks. But other than that, falling off generally isn't too bad.
Let's talk about costs. I mean, there's no doubt that this is an expensive sport. What will it cost an average person to pursue a sport like this?
If you're just taking riding lessons, you're sort of looking around 800 to 1,000 Rand a month. Or if you're looking at owning your own horse, obviously the costs are substantially more. So it's generally around the 4,000 Rand mark for a horse a month.
You've been riding for more than a decade, and it would appear that you are quite involved in the sport. What are your thoughts of South African equestrian riders? Well, how do they fare against international opposition?
The thing is, it's very difficult because, being a good equestrian is all about competing in a lot of different places and against a lot of different people. And in Europe, it's a lot easier. They can travel with their horses a lot more and go to more competitions, because we're so isolated in South Africa. We don't really get the chance to compete against any other big riders other than sort of Zimbabwe or places like that. And I think South Africa is pretty much the biggest in Africa for competing. So our riders don't really get the chance to compete against the other riders. So I don't think it's really a fair game.
You have had a lot of success with Kibal, and Ivy League is slowly following in his footsteps. What win stands out for you, and why?
Probably one of the last few shows I went to, it was the KPC Classic, and I was running so late. It was a terrible day. I ran incredibly late for the show. The show was running really early, so I kind of ran in. I didn't even get a chance to warm up, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm just gonna have a good round and see how it goes. And we ended up winning the class by about 15 seconds quicker than the next person, which was unreal.
You just mentioned now that you didn't have time to warm up. What does warm up entail?
You have to kind of get your horse supple, like any athlete, they also need to stretch and get going. So you can't just go into your competition and ask them to perform really complex movements without having them warm up. So it's, depending on the horse, it's sort of anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour of a little bit of trot, a little bit of canter, a couple of jumps, or whatever it is that you need to do.
Let's talk about the South African scene. How is it in South Africa competition-wise?
Well, the competition is, there's a lot of people competing, and there are a lot of shows. It really is a big thing. Joburg seems to be the biggest place to be. It's the sort of hub for horse riders. But the competition's pretty hectic. There's a surprising amount of horse riders, even though equestrianism isn't really the biggest sport in the country. It's not bad. It's pretty big.
What are your equestrian aspirations going forward?
To be honest with you, I really just want to get my horses to where they can be. That, I want them to do the best they can do. So Ivy's a little bit younger than Kibal. He's taken me a long way. So hopefully with her, I want to just see her perform, and I'd like to really pursue my eventing a little bit more, and hopefully get up there maybe to the 3 stars one day.
If you had a special message for the next generation of equestrian riders, what would you say?
It's all about the hard work. You got to just keep going and keep working and fall off and get back on every single time and push through the hard times, because it that's how you succeed. You just got to keep trying.
Game On Magazine would like to take this opportunity to thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's been an absolute privilege learning more about you, your horses, and your sport. So thank you.
Pleasure.